This is Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. One of the projects we've worked on quite a bit over the years has been something we've referred to as the darker side, or stories of crime and punishment, if you will, in historic Mississauga. One of the things that we've discovered during the course of the Darker Side series are some of the firsts that Mississauga has been connected with, or historic Mississauga has connections with. In some cases, in a dubious distinction. One of them is the first train robbery in Canada took place within the bounds of historic Mississauga. That took place in November of 1874. November 13th, specifically, of 1874, a train coming from Hamilton into Toronto stopped to take on water at Port Credit. It is somewhere along that Great Western Line through Port Credit, again in November of 1874, that perpetrators found their way onto the train. The train itself was an American Express special, and it had a locked strongbox car on the train that was delivering payroll to a company in Toronto. When the train pulled out of Port Credit, nothing seemed to be amiss. There were no alarm bells raised. The train continued on its merry way, arrived in Toronto as it was scheduled to do, and upon its arrival in Toronto, it was discovered that a burglary or a theft had taken place on the train. The perpetrators were unknown. What they found was the special bank car had the two employees had been bound and knocked unconscious, and valuables, including a great deal of money, were taken from the bank car. In excess of $150,000 were missing from the bank. This is 1874. Think of the amount of money in today's dollars that would have been. But in 1874, $150,000 stolen on a train between Port Credit and its arrival in Toronto. There was a great deal of uncertainty. The employees that were bound and gagged had not seen the perpetrators beforehand. They had been caught unawares and surprised and knocked unconscious. Some of the people that were inquired about or were questioned about it afterwards had described seeing four people loitering about the train station at Port Credit when the train had arrived. One of them described seeing people what he thought were akin to Ku Klux Klan uniforms, that were white draped clothes over their bodies to kind of hide their identity, if you will. Although it's uncertain exactly what the perpetrators looked like or how they accessed the train itself. What was found upon train at Toronto when the train arrived was that the alarm bell between the engine and the bank car had been cut, had been purposely cut. So at some point the alarm had been severed. The perpetrators gained access to the locked car where the money was stored, knocking the guards unconscious and making off with the loot. One of the guards, in a confused state, not quite sure, said that the perpetrators had jumped from the moving train as it slowed down near Toronto. One of the guards specifically pointing out near the Lakeview border of Etobicoke and historic Mississauga. Another one saying that they jumped out as they reached the Canadian National Exhibition grounds near what was then known as Stanley Barracks. And so either way, it was unknown where and how they accessed the train and how they got off the train, but nonetheless, the end result was $150,000 missing. One of the challenges were that upon launching an investigation, the Toronto police, assisted by the Toronto Township Constables, that is our local police force, they were engaged in trying to search out for clues and to try to determine who committed the crime, to no success. They had no information and no real witnesses to go by in terms of trying to determine what happened to the missing loot. You can you can follow the story itself in the Globe and Mail in 1874. Even goes as far as creating a map for the crime process itself and where they suspect the criminals had jumped from the moving train. But it was all in vain. The search for information, the search for the criminals responsible went on for months with nothing found. And even to this day, the first train robbery in Canada, which took place here within the bounds of historic Mississauga, remains unsolved. Those people were not found. The money was never located. And one of the dubious distinctions on the darker side of our story, the first train robbery in Canada, unsolved, took place here in historic Mississauga.